So after 10 years and hundreds of dives, I finally got the bends. Let's talk about it and get into what happened. I am recording this video in December 2025, and over the course of this past year, I've actually had 2 episodes of decompression illness. The first one was in May of 2025. The second one was just this past month in December of 2025. So I want to go over sort of what the events were, what led up to the initial episode, what has changed since then, and try to get the information out there for as many people as possible, because I'm a proponent of disseminating information and learning from experience and having group knowledge that can make everybody a better diver. So first of all, probably the most common question that I'm asked when I tell somebody that I got the bends is, what did you come up too fast? Typically that's what we think of in terms of divers getting the bends, is somebody who had been on a dive, planned a specific profile, and then came up to the surface too quickly. My instance, in this case, that is actually not what happened. Like I had mentioned before, for anybody who has seen any of my videos, anybody who follows my channel or social media, I have a little over 10 years experience as a diver, including 3 years as a professional diver. So the instance in this case was not just that I blew to the surface. I didn't blow my profile, I didn't miss a decompression stop, I didn't miss a safety stop, I didn't come up too fast. The initial episode that happened in May was on a technical dive down in the Keys, so that is one of the precipitating factors as you go from an area of higher pressure to an area of lower pressure. When you're breathing pressurized gas at depth, you're taking on a certain level of inert nitrogen gas that at pressure, at depth, gets dissolved into your blood and then perfuses throughout your body, and types of tissue in your body are more or less susceptible to decompression symptoms based on their relative blood flow. Now, in general, when we have a successful controlled ascent, that same nitrogen that makes its way from your bloodstream into a tissue compartment is able to stay in your bloodstream or get back into your bloodstream because of that pressure, make its way to your lungs, you exhale it, nothing happens. When you get the bends, when you have decompression illness, that nitrogen never gets a chance to get back to your lungs and get exhaled. So wherever it comes out of solution, wherever that nitrogen is lodged, when the pressure becomes low enough, the ambient pressure around your body becomes low enough, it's going to come out of solution right there, whether that's in a joint. Probably the most common symptom of mild decompression illness is joint pain. So it's not uncommon for people for that nitrogen to come out of solution inside the joint and cause pain. It can come out of solution in your lungs. It can come out of solution in your CSF, or your cerebrospinal space, which is your brain and your spinal cord, causing neurological damage. Any number of symptom progressions can happen essentially based on where the nitrogen comes out of solution when it reaches a pressure gradient such that it can come back out of solution at the wrong time. Now, in my particular case, in May of 2025, like I said, I had been on a technical dive in the Keys. We're in the Spiegel Grove, which, if anybody's watching this video as a diver, more than likely you've heard of or dove the Spiegel Grove yourself. The week prior, we had gone down to do some recreational diving that ended up getting cut short because I hadn't been feeling well, which may have been a precursor to what was to come. But this is day 2 of diving. We had done a technical dive to the Spiegel Grove. Between dives, I had been feeling totally fine, but noticed a very small, 2 or 3 inch spot on my abdomen that looked sort of bruised. It resolved, a few minutes after I had gotten out of the water. It's very unusual for what would ultimately become the skin bends to just dissipate so quickly. Feeling otherwise fine, having been on an appropriate mix and an appropriate ascent profile. Didn't make too much of it. In any case, we took a few hours to do our surface interval before we got back in the water. Second dive again to the Spiegel Grove. Similar dive profile, similar decompression profile. When we got back up to the boat, when we got back to the surface, actually just before the surface, was when I started to think that something was going wrong. When we had gotten to 10 or 20 feet, I started noticing, I think I was breathing 80% O2 at the time for our final decompression stop. I started noticing a raw sort of burning sensation when I was breathing in my chest. We had been doing a number of decompression dives over the prior few days. In that split second, I attributed it maybe to some insult or injury to my lungs due to the oxygen content of the decompression gas, knowing really that it was probably not that we were probably starting to feel some symptoms of decompression illness. Otherwise felt okay, so continued our last decompression stop, got up to the surface, grabbed on a line to pull myself in. And about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way back to the boat, I started feeling more symptoms. My left leg started to feel a little weak. My left arm started to feel a little weak. And I was having more trouble breathing. I was able to get back to the ladder. A crew member pulled me on board, got me back to my seat. I was sort of still trying to get myself down from breathing too heavily, thinking, okay, maybe I'm just overworked. This crew member took my decompression bottle, and at that point, my breathing got a lot worse. I really had difficulty inhaling and exhaling all the way. Luckily, at this point, my wife, who were both PAs, she's also a PA, she got on board and looked at me and asked me if I was okay, and I was able to tell her with nothing more than a head shake that I was not okay. Our tech instructor got on the boat after the fact, looked over at me for about 2 seconds and turned to the captain, the gentleman who was driving the boat, said, "We gotta go." There was a recreational dive getting ready to go in the water. He told them, "Dive's canceled, we gotta get back." Pulled the mooring up, and it was full throttle. A few members of the crew, as well as my wife and other divers, were able to get me out of my gear. I had been diving with aluminum 80 doubles. Got all my stuff off me, got me more situated, and within a few minutes I had O2 on my face, which I'm sure, again, for all you divers out there, this is sort of beating a dead horse, but in the event of decompression illness, the number one most important thing, aside from eventually getting recompression treatment, is getting that O2 on. Get that oxygen on the diver's face, get it cranked up, and get them breathing as a high concentration as O2 as is immediately available. So they had me on O2 right away. They had alerted the medics prior to arrival. Medics met us at the dock, and we were at Mariners Hospital in Key Largo a few minutes later. My breathing was really labored. I had a full sort of that rash that I had noticed earlier that had gone away was back in force, wrapped around my whole abdomen. It looks like pinkish purple modeling. People describe it as sort of like a silk web. My breathing was terrible. I was doing okay from a neurological standpoint. Like I mentioned, my left arm and left leg felt sort of weak. That was stable, and I could still move my hands, I could move my legs. It just didn't feel quite normal. So we get back to the dock. The medics are talking to me. They got me on the rig, again, got me breathing 100% O2. Having gotten there, and importantly, my wife brought both our computers. We had the whole dive profile written out. As much information about the dive as you can possibly bring to the people who will be taking definitive care of you. Do that. Bring a dive watch or a computer. Bring a dive log. Bring as much information to the profile. Depth, time, breathing gas, decompression profile as you possibly can. Get it to that dive doc because they're going to be able to do more to help you the more information they have about the inciting event. When we got to the ER, there was a diver in the chamber who had been in there recompressing. Luckily, he didn't have a whole lot of time left in his treatment. So probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours after we arrived to Mariners Hospital, I was in a recompression chamber undergoing a Navy Table 6 treatment, which is a little over 5 hours. They give you an oxygen mask that's not at all similar to, aside from maybe the shape and where it goes, to a typical flimsy, clear, plastic, non-rebreather mask that you might find in an oxygen kit or in an ambulance. This is a rubber aviation face mask that you might see in a movie about jet fighters, fighter pilots. They put this webbing behind your head and ratchet it down so it's as tight as it can be to your face. My breathing felt really labored. I had what's called pulmonary edema. A lot of fluid had built up in my lungs really quickly, and everywhere else for that matter. So I sort of felt as though I were drowning, I were choking. So I kept trying to pull the mask off, which diminished the amount of pure oxygen that I was inhaling, which really can have a negative impact on the quality and the thoroughness of the treatment that you're getting there. My goal would have been, as much as possible, to keep that mask on and get as much oxygen as I could on board. And that's what I ended up doing in my second treatment. I went back the next morning, went for another table 6 treatment, another little over 5 hours. A lot of IV fluids, a lot of lab work, a couple of CAT scans. My whole body had, all my skin and soft tissue on my abdomen and my chest had filled with fluid. So after a couple of rides, I call it chamber rides, a couple of rides in the chamber, 2 Navy Table 6s, I was discharged a little over a day and a half, 2 days later, feeling mostly resolved, mostly at what they call symptom plateau. You treat until you get symptom plateau, until your treatment isn't going to help you any further. So after 2 treatments, I think I left the hospital probably with very slight residual symptoms. I sort of felt really fatigued. It almost feels post-viral. It feels like you had a really bad virus. Fatigue, headache, malaise. They tell you not to fly within 3 days of recompression chamber or getting DCI, getting the bends. So we actually rented a car and drove back from Florida to Rhode Island over the course of 2 days. I ended up in a recompression chamber twice, pulmonary and neurological, and cutaneous, which is skin, DCI, were the constellation of my symptoms. They were treated with recompression, fluids, oxygen, the whole works. They're an amazing team at Mariners Hospital in Key Largo. They have a hospital immediately nearby with recompression chamber and hyperbaric physicians. So their team was incredible. They got me in quickly. They take great care of their patients. Mariners Hospital, I can't say enough good things about them. In the meantime, between May and now, my goal was to figure out why this happened, get cleared, discuss it with a dive doc, and figure out when and if it would be safe to me to return to diving and what work needed to be done in the meantime. I've had, at this point, a number of tests, a number of rounds of lab work. I've had cardiac workup. I've had all these tests run, and the most striking and most noteworthy finding thus far has been what's called the PFO, a patent foramen ovale. The top 2 chambers of your heart, called the atria, there's a wall that divides them, just like the bottom 2 chambers. There's a hole in that wall in your atria while you're in utero, while you're in the womb. Shortly after birth, in 75 to 80% of people, that hole closes because now you have access to your lungs, you can breathe for yourself, and that hole closes off and there's a solid wall between the 2 atria, the top chambers of your heart. In about 20 to 25% of people, that doesn't close, and they end up with what's called the PFO. For the majority of people even who have a PFO, in most cases nothing ever happens. It's generally not symptomatic. It's usually discovered incidentally. Or somebody may have had a stroke and has no other explanation for it. A lot of times that's what triggers the evaluation for a PFO, and that's when one's discovered. In my case, or in divers, decompression illness, that's either unexplained. I had what's called an unearned hit, an undeserved hit, and so that's what triggered the evaluation that led to the discovery of the PFO. There are a few types of decompression illness that are more closely correlated with the PFO, and that's neurological. I had arm and leg weakness, cutaneous or skin bends, which I had that mottled rash that we talked about, and inner ear. Those are all very closely related to having a PFO. So that also triggered the search for one, which ultimately did end up find one. The questions that remain are what to do, what will constitute clearance for me to return to technical diving. I was cleared initially for recreational diving. I just recently went on a trip to Mexico. I had had this full workup and been cleared to dive about 3 months after my initial incident and had been doing fine. I had done a couple of recreational dives here at home in Rhode Island using nitrox and had no issues. In Cabo, we did a dive to about 65, 70 feet using air, which actually led to a recurrence. I got back to the hotel and had a small area of that same skin bends, the modeling on my abdomen in the exact same spot. So unfortunately we had to cancel the rest of the trip, abandoned going on a liveaboard, and flew home a few days later. The recommended treatment is either to just go back to recreational diving and basically use nitrox for every dive, but program my computer as if it's just air. What that'll do is shorten my NDL. It'll get me back up to the surface with a more conservative profile using the nitrox and telling my computer that it's air, and just to continue diving like that. I have a really strong desire to get back into technical diving. The structural cardiology team that I've been working with, the cardiology team that I've discussed things with, has offered to do the PFO closure. It's a very simple procedure. And that's where we decide, that's where we stand, is trying to decide sort of where to go from here, what to do, whether to take that risk, because every procedure has its level of risk. If this is something that I want to pursue to get back into technical diving, it's something that I'm going to have to take seriously and consider really carefully. The reason I wanted to bring any of this up and talk about it at all is because I'm a big fan of lessons learned. I think it's imperative that we take any situation, especially when things don't go quite as planned, and try to move forward with something that'll make us better in the future. Anybody who's a diver and watching this video, I want you to take away at least a few things. Number one, dive accident insurance should be as much a part of your dive kit as fins, mask, regulator. It should be absolutely non-negotiable. Whether you think it's ever going to happen to you or not, be left out of a trip because of an incident or because you think you're never going to eat the bends, doesn't matter. Get it. I have Dan personally. Dan is my go-to for both my dive accident insurance as well as my professional liability insurance. They're amazing. The crew was on the phone with the Dan medics immediately after the first incident, and after the second incident, they picked up the phone within 2 minutes or so. We discussed the symptoms and got me over to see a dive doc. This is back in Mexico just a few weeks ago. So having dive accident insurance in my mind is just absolutely non-negotiable. As my late friend, mentor, and dive instructor used to say, for the cost of a snorkel, it's the most valuable piece of dive equipment you're ever going to buy. So call Dan, Divers Alert Network, get an insurance policy, 100% worth it. It's one of the most important pieces of my dive gear is having that in my back pocket in case something happens. We always want to get back in the water. We don't want to miss the next dive. We don't want to be the right reason the dive is canceled. Take the time to educate yourself on what the potential symptoms of decompression illness are, even the most mild ones, the most subtle ones. Look out for them. And if something feels wrong, looks wrong, seems wrong, it is wrong. Until proven otherwise, assume that something is going wrong. And the worst thing you can do sometimes is just ignore it and get back in the water. I know we all love to make our dives. Doesn't matter. If something's wrong, if you even get an inkling of the sense that you're getting decompression illness, get it treated, get on oxygen. Early and extensive with the oxygen. As soon as you can possibly get onto it or get a diver onto it, and the longer you can expose them to it, the better the outcome will be. So early treatment with oxygen, just get it done, get them to a recompression chamber, or at least get evaluated by a dive doc, or if you have Dan, if you have Divers Alert Network insurance, get on the phone with their medics. They're on call 24/7, 365. Give them the rundown of what's going on and get treatment. What I want people to take away from this is there should be no negative connotation around getting bent, about getting decompression illness. I don't think that's a good thing. Decompression illness is no joke. It can very quickly be fatal or paralyze you, or you could have permanent neurological deficits. So decompression illness is no joke. I am a conservative diver. I consider myself to be a pretty intelligent diver. Gone through lots of certifications and training. I've done dives all over the world. I'm by no means the most experienced diver I know. I know people with tens of thousands of dives, but I am a dive professional. I have certifications through 3 different certifying bodies. I work really hard to understand diving, and I have clinical experience. I have a background knowledge in physiology. I love decompression theory and dive medicine. And despite all that insight, it happened to me twice. Please don't let this be something that you ignore. Don't let there be any stigma around it. Anybody can end a dive for any reason at any time with no questions asked. That should be your mantra on the boat at the dive site. It doesn't matter. If something's wrong, call it a day, get looked at, get treatment. Dives go wrong. Decompression illness and decompression theory is an incompletely understood entity. Despite centuries of research, we still don't know exactly how it all works. Even mild symptoms like the skin bends, the mottling rash, is now thought to be related to a neurological hit. No stigma, no, I don't want to be the person to end the dive or call the dive or make the whole dive boat go back to the dock when they were just about to get into the water, which is what happened to me. 15 people, recreational divers, were about to get in the water after me, who I ruined their afternoon. It is what it is. Don't worry about other people. Don't worry about any of the other stigma. You shouldn't have to worry about the costs. So get dive insurance, get treatment, get on oxygen immediately, get evaluated, and if necessary, get into a recompression chamber. That's my story. There's more to come. Like I said, we still have some work to do. We still have potentially the PFO closure facing us, and then ultimately, hopefully, a return to, if not recreational diving, technical diving in the future. But I'm sure, hopefully, I'll be able to talk about that in a future video. So if you're new to the channel, if you're interested in diving, underwater photography or videography, I'm going to be working on doing more of that. I do a lot of underwater photography as it is, so hopefully with my return to diving, my plan is to get more into videography, but also to start doing some gear reviews, some equipment setup tutorials, some underwater photography setup tutorials. So if you're not subscribed already, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button, follow my channel for more dive and ultimately travel and outdoor content. Give this video a thumbs up, and stay tuned for the next one. Until then, dive safe.